Hello, my name is David Frainer. As one of the hosts of the Seacoast Parkinson Wellness Expo, I'll be posting weekly videos in the build up to the event on June 21st. In particular, I'll be sharing brief conversations with several presenters and a few of the organizers. We'll learn about their involvement with Parkinson's and the work and play they do with and on behalf of Parkinson's patients. And first up is our co-host, Jill Backman. So, Jill, how did you get involved in helping folks with Parkinson's?
Well, my 5 years ago, my father, Rick Hardin, was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And when he was diagnosed, he was fairly healthy. He had a little tremor and, a little he couldn't taste. There were little things, but he was pretty healthy. And we thought we were going to have a long, many years of navigating this disease with him. And he, about a year ago, he fell. And when he fell, it sort of launched him into another stage of Parkinson's. And he needed more care. He couldn't really drive much anymore. And my mother, they lived alone. They live alone in their house. And my mother has macular degeneration, so she could no longer drive. And so they needed my help and more of my help, mostly with transportation, but also, you know, advocating for them and for him because we were driving, you know, an hour, 45 minutes to an hour to get him to OT appointments and PT appointments, which was taking a toll on him, and on me because I work full time and I have a son. And, we were just kind of doing it and not really thinking, well, if there was any other option for us. And then, even transportation, I'd looked up transportation in our area for people with Parkinson's and other resources for people with Parkinson's in our area just to help, answer questions. I I joined Facebook groups, but they weren't Facebook groups in our area. They were national Facebook groups and they were just filled with comments and nothing exactly what I was looking for, and not drilled down to, our area or our specific needs. And so it was a lot of digging and hunting and asking questions and until we got to the point where we realized we could get him home care. We could get him somebody coming to the home to do that. I mean, why nobody told us that, I don't really know. And I don't know if they just didn't think of it or just I'm not really sure, but that was a huge weight lifted off our chests. And so we got that going, but insurance only covers a certain amount of time. Anyway, we also discovered that he had his Parkinson's might be related to his exposure to Agent Orange. And he was in Vietnam in 1969 and to 1970, which is when they were dumping Agent Orange on the troops in Vietnam. So it turns out that recently, Parkinson's people who are diagnosed with Parkinson's and were exposed to Agent Orange could receive VA benefits. But we didn't really know that, but we just happened to fall upon that information. And it was just hard to find resources, hard to find information, hard to find help with Parkinson's specifically. And unfortunately, he passed in January of this year, 2025. He had fallen, and that kind of just triggered a whole chain reaction, and he didn't make it. But when this Dan Tobin, our friend Dan and fellow co-host Dan Tobin, approached me because I had worked with him at a previous job, and he also was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And he approached me and asked me if I would be willing to help him with this Expo, which is basically bringing all the resources that are in our area to light for people with Parkinson's in our area. And I was like, absolutely yes, because if I can help somebody like myself navigate this very confusing world of Parkinson's care, and then I'm in, so if any way I could help to honor my father and to help somebody else is why I'm participating in this expo.
So you were, to some extent, sometimes referred to as the sandwich generation,
Yes.
sort of caught between both of your parents, actually, because your mother had macular degeneration. Mine did too, so I understand about that. In fact, my uncle was the president of the American Macular Degeneration Association years ago. He passed a decade ago and managed to navigate all around New York City with macular degeneration. So that I understand that that's sort of a whole other level
Yeah.
beyond Parkinson's. So you were sort of
Mhm. Yeah, so
double whammy, you might say.
yeah. And I have a 9-year-old son who's in, who's, he's can be challenging. And and so so it got to the point where my dad had trouble with the calendar, keeping appointments and, just kind of seeing the calendar. And so we had to just take one day at a time and not think too far ahead. And but she couldn't see the calendar to write and or
Right?
if mail would come in, he was having trouble processing the information on the mail, and but she couldn't see the mail to read it to him. So it was it was very, very tricky. And plus he was the technology guy. So he paid all the bills on apps and used all electronics to pay bills and things like that. And so, she couldn't just take that over. So we had to get his passwords from him and get all that, taken care of. And we're still struggling with that. But
Well, I have a number of questions which I think you've actually answered already about your personal connection and your biggest challenge. Uh,
Mm.
but what do you see in terms of future kinds of challenges, either for you personally or as we all collectively to work together on the challenge that is Parkinson's disease? Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's challenging that everybody's symptoms are different. And there's no, I mean, I was always looking for information on my dad's specific symptoms, and people would be like, I don't have any experience with that. When he fell, he went into a complete state of hallucination. So he was hallucinating a lot. And it was very, so I was trying furiously to figure out, has this happened to anybody else? Is this, and nobody had experience with that. And that's challenging, I think, and it's scary, and especially if you don't, you just need, in a world where it's full of information at your fingertips, all you have to do is go to Google and ask a question, you have the answer, but not with this disease.
Right. Dan and I, as you know, are both part of the Kittery support group.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we, at each group meeting, we introduce ourselves and say a little bit about how long we've had the diagnosis. And kind of along the lines of what you're saying, one of the things that I think is quite confusing in a way or challenging, if you break an arm, you know what to do. You have a broken arm and you've had to set it and fix it. But we have people in our support group, which is why I mentioned it, who attend the group and have just or don't have yet a diagnosis from a neurologist that they have Parkinson's, and yet they have quite a few of the symptoms. And yet there's really, it seems like, so to me, one of the challenges is actually understanding what it means to have Parkinson's disease, how that diagnosis works out, and then to work on the kinds of things we're working on with the Wellness Expo. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree. I it, I think that I wish that I had this for my dad is this community to bounce ideas off of the way you do. I think that would have been so helpful for him and for myself to come together and talk to people about what they're going through, even if you don't find that common thread as like, have the same symptoms, at least you can relate to that, to going through that experience of not having the same symptoms, but having this disease. And also going through that long process of getting diagnosed. It's not an easy thing to get diagnosed, which is which is strange to me. My dad he lost his taste a long time ago. Yeah. And that's a common symptom. And but so why aren't we, why isn't that just the immediate red flag? But instead he was, they were looking at as adenoids and his, things in his throat, and he went to ENT doctors and things like that. So, but we also don't have it in our family, so maybe that's why. But yes, I think this bringing this community together is just so overdue, long overdue, and is so important.
Well, and that's part of the goal of the Parkinson's Wellness Expo. Well, Jill, this brings us to the end of our brief conversation. Again, my name is David Frainer, and we hope to see you at the Seacoast Parkinson's Wellness Expo on June 21st at the community campus in Portsmouth, along with Jill and Dan and others of our presenters. And in the meantime, for more Parkinson's resources in the Seacoast area, be sure to like and follow the Seacoast Parkinson's Wellness Facebook page. And that's it.